In 1871, an Illinois farmer unearthed a trove of ancient Roman coins. The official report called it a prank, but what happened next, not just to the coins, but to the land itself, suggests a deliberate cover-up and a truth far stranger than mere lost treasure. Imagine the unforgiving Illinois prairie, a landscape carved by glaciers and generations of hard work. It was here, in the spring of 1871, that Jeremiah Fowler, a farmer whose weathered hands knew the stubborn resistance of the earth, guided his plow through newly turned soil. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the promise of a bountiful harvest. His plowshare, a steel blade designed to slice through roots and packed dirt, suddenly snagged on something unyielding. Not a rock, he thought, for the impact was duller, more resonant. He stopped his team, their breath pluming in the cool morning air, and stepped down, his heavy boots sinking slightly into the soft loam. Kneeling, he began to dig with his bare hands, the black dirt clinging to his calloused fingers. What he uncovered sent a jolt of disbelief through him. Not a stone, nor an old tool, but a small, corroded metallic disc.
He rubbed it clean against his trousers, and an unmistakable profile emerged, a stern, regal face framed by a laurel wreath. On the reverse, Latin inscriptions, alien to the familiar English and German words spoken in his isolated corner of the frontier. More and more of these strange objects lay beneath, nestled together as if deliberately placed. He pulled a handful from the earth, their weight substantial, their surfaces bearing the unmistakable patina of extreme age. These were not the currency of a fledgling nation, nor the trinkets of a recent past. These were coins, ancient beyond local memory, bearing the likeness of Roman emperors, their dates centuries before the very concept of America. Word of Fowler's unusual find spread quickly through the small farming community, first with incredulity, then with a growing sense of wonder and unease. The coins, mostly copper and brass, but with a surprising number of silver denarii, dated primarily from the reigns of Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. Their exquisite detail, despite the centuries of burial, spoke of a craftsmanship utterly foreign to the New World. A Roman presence beneath the Illinois soil was not merely improbable, it was impossible. Or so, at least, official narratives insisted. The initial reaction among the Fowler family, preserved in their meticulously kept journals and letters, was one of profound bewilderment, laced with an almost reverent awe. Jeremiah's wife, Sarah, a woman of practical sensibility, reportedly scrubbed one of the silver coins until its luster returned, staring at the ancient emperor's face as if it held the key to an unfathomable secret. Their children, captivated, imagined legions marching across the very fields they now tilled. These objects were tangible proof of a history that defied all known geography and chronological understanding. This core conflict, coins that should simply not exist in such a location, became the genesis of a far deeper enigma. The family records, detailing the discovery with painstaking precision, paint a picture starkly at odds with the official dismissal that followed. What the Fowler family found, meticulously documented in their own hand, was deemed by external authorities to be a deliberate fabrication, a crude hoax designed for attention or profit. But the sheer volume of the discovery, the indisputable authenticity of the artifacts themselves, and the subsequent events that unfolded on Fowler's land, defy such a simplistic, convenient explanation. There was something buried beneath that prairie, something ancient and deeply anomalous that powerful institutions were determined to explain away, or, failing that, to erase from the historical record. The very mention of an anomalous presence on Illinois soil, particularly one hinting at pre-Columbian Roman artifacts, triggered an almost immediate and, frankly, visceral reaction from academic circles. Reports,
initially dismissed as rural folklore, slowly made their way to institutions of higher learning and, crucially, to the nascent Smithsonian institution. The response was not one of open-minded inquiry, but rather a swift, almost predetermined categorization. The prevailing archaeological consensus of the late 19th century firmly established North America as untouched by European civilizations prior to the Vikings, and certainly not by imperial Rome. This deeply ingrained framework, an intellectual edifice built on decades of excavation and theory, left little room for deviation. Within weeks of the whispers reaching Washington, a series of ostensibly scholarly pronouncements began to emerge. These were not the result of exhaustive on-site investigation, but rather of a priori reasoning.
The artifacts, described in local newspapers with an increasing, almost sensational detail, were deemed, without true empirical validation, to be either elaborate forgeries or, more charitably, colonial oddities, remnants brought by later European settlers and somehow misplaced. One prominent anthropologist, whose name remains conspicuous by its absence in the Smithsonian's official archives concerning this period, reportedly declared the find a charming rural fabrication, undoubtedly intended to garner undue attention for the provincial farmer. The implication was clear. These were simple folk, prone to flights of fancy or, worse, outright deception. Official communications, however sparse and carefully worded, consistently echoed this dismissive sentiment. One internal memo, unearthed years later from a private collection, referred to the Illinois anomaly as a distracting local curiosity that should not divert genuine research efforts. The tone was not merely skeptical, it was subtly pejorative, implying a lack of intellectual rigor on the part of anyone who might lend credence to such outlandish claims. There was a notable absence of genuine curiosity, a reluctance to engage with the possibility, however remote, that established historical narratives might require re-evaluation. The very architecture of academic thought, it seems, was not designed to accommodate such a profound challenge to its foundational tenets. This official dismissal, though lacking in substantive investigation, managed to largely stifle mainstream academic interest. Yet the farmer, Elias Fowler, remained unshaken. His persistent belief rooted less in academic theory and more in the undeniable physical presence of countless, undeniably ancient objects unearthed from his own land, was not easily swayed. His family, descendants of early settlers, stood firmly behind him, their convictions strengthened by the sheer volume of the discovery. They weren't just finding a coin or two, they were unearthing what appeared to be a significant cache, an archaeological trove that simply defied the official narrative. The local community, while perhaps less vocal in their support, harbored a quiet understanding. They had seen the Fowler's sincerity, witnessed the artifacts firsthand, and intuitively recognized that what they held in their hands was something truly anomalous, something far more profound than a simple hoax. This stark contrast between the authoritative, yet unexamined, dismissal from a distant institution and the steadfast, first-hand conviction of those on the ground forms the unfortunate foundation of this forgotten chapter. The question, then, is not merely what was found, but why the powerful institutions of the time were so determined to ensure it was never properly seen. The true gravity of their discovery, however, only truly unfurls when we delve into the primary sources. We are not speaking of official archaeological reports, for those, curiously, remain conspicuously scarce. Instead, our investigation leads us to family diaries, meticulously kept by generations of the Fowler family, dating back to the 1,830 seconds. These journals, now largely residing in private collections, having been returned or quietly displaced from public archives over the decades, offer a startlingly consistent account. Take, for instance, the entry dated September 12, 1871, penned by a Mrs. Eleanor Fowler.
It describes not merely a few scattered coins, but rather a dense metallic mass found 14 feet below the surface, encased within unyielding clay and strata consistent with glacial till. This speaks to a burial deliberately deep, certainly not a superficial cache, hinting at recent European settlement. Her husband's ledger from the same year notes the sheer volume. Upon the initial uncovering, estimation suggests over 300 pieces, and the trench deepens. This isn't a handful of trinkets, it's an extensive hoard. Further corroboration comes from local newspaper archives. The Prairieton Gazette, October 5, 1871, ran a small column, largely overshadowed by harvest reports, titled "Curious Finds on Fowler Farm." It details the initial observations by a Dr. Elias Vance, a retired geologist living locally, who posited, even then, that the coins bore unmistakable signs of foreign origin and antiquity far exceeding any known European settlement or native trade routes. He was one of the few, at the time, to voice theories regarding transatlantic contact, even suggesting a Phoenician or Roman provenance, ideas swiftly dismissed by prevailing academic thought and subsequently expunged from later retellings of the discovery. These local communiques and personal records consistently depict the coins as deeply stratified, often requiring significant excavation, and frequently intermingled with decidedly older material culture, native pottery fragments carbon dated to centuries before Columbus, and tools of unknown origin. The initial inclination of the community, based on first-hand observation, was not of counterfeits or recent burials, but of something profoundly ancient, intentionally hidden, and decidedly out of place within the conventional historical understanding of Illinois. It is these precise details, the depth of burial, the geological context, the sheer quantity, and these early, locally voiced alternative theories that form the bedrock of the narrative that was, quite demonstrably, overlooked, downplayed, or outright dismissed by official channels. The official record, we find, is less a complete account and more a meticulously pruned garden, where inconvenient truths simply failed to take root. This is where the evidential discrepancies truly begin to emerge, exposing a pattern of selective record-keeping and a quiet yet effective suppression of challenging information. And then, as if the land itself were responding to this unprecedented intrusion, a series of peculiar geological phenomena began to manifest in the very field where the coins lay buried. The family diaries, meticulously kept by Mary Beth O'Malley, starting in the spring of 1872, detail what she termed the ground's unease. These were not minor tremors or expected seasonal shifts. Within weeks of the most extensive recovery efforts for the coins, the soil around the excavation site began a gradual, yet undeniable subsidence. Mary Beth's entries describe segments of the field simply sinking, not dramatically, but by several inches, sometimes a foot, in areas directly correlating with the heaviest coin concentrations. This was accompanied by strange, intermittent sounds emanating from beneath the earth, a low, guttural murmur, sometimes described as a groan, or a faint, distant rumbling like thunder, even on clear, cloudless nights. Her husband, Thomas, initially dismissed these as natural shifts or the settling of disturbed earth. But as the sounds persisted and the ground continued to yield in unexpected ways,
Even he began to document them with a growing sense of unease. The soil composition itself underwent inexplicable changes. Samples taken years later by a geology student from the nascent University of Illinois in 1891 indicated anomalous mineral deposits, traces of elements not naturally occurring in the local shale and sandstone bedrock, and in concentrations that defied conventional geological explanation. The student's report, buried then for decades in obscure departmental archives, speaks of unusual electromagnetic signatures at depths beyond typical surface soil disturbance, hinting at something metallic or perhaps even artificial, yet immense. These weren't merely isolated incidents. The field, once uniform and stable, became a canvas of subtle yet persistent geological disruption. Sinkholes, small at first, then growing to several feet in diameter, appeared sporadically, invariably within a 50-yard radius of where the bulk of the Illinois coins had been recovered. The O'Malley family, increasingly isolated by the local community's superstitious interpretations, maintained detailed maps, marking each new subsidence, each new pocket of unstable ground. What these maps unequivocally showed was a direct, almost causal relationship between the anomalous presence of the coins, lying deep and vast beneath the earth, and the subsequent disturbance of the land above. It is as if the subterranean presence of these artifacts, whether a structure, a vessel, or simply the immense metallic mass of the coins themselves, was exerting a profound physical influence on the geological strata. This is a pattern we have observed in other undocumented archaeological discoveries mentioned in previous analyses. The inexplicable concrete structure unearthed beneath the Siberian permafrost that warped the surrounding landscape for miles, or the perfectly smooth, unblemished marble floor discovered beneath the Arizona desert that caused localized microseismic activity for months. The official dismissal of the Illinois coins as mere counterfeits or a modern hoax entirely sidesteps this crucial and deeply disturbing geological evidence. How does one explain a field that groans? How does one account for soil that shifts and sinks in direct response to the removal of certain artifacts? These weren't just coins that were lost, or even simply buried. They were intricately linked to a much larger, underlying structure or event, a presence that disturbed the very fabric of the land. The earth, in its own silent, unsettling way, was responding to something profoundly alien in its depths, something that the official narrative deliberately chose to ignore. This pattern of what was said versus what was written down versus what was subsequently erased begins to take on a far more sinister and intentional aspect when confronted with such undeniable physical alterations to the natural world. And it is precisely this intricate web of physical evidence of a land disturbed by an anomalous presence that spotlights the subsequent actions of those dispatched to investigate. When the initial reports of the Illinois coins reached bureaucratic ears, particularly those of the nascent Smithsonian institution and the various state geological surveys, the response was not one of open scientific inquiry. Quite the contrary. It appears a concerted effort was almost immediately initiated to manage and ultimately to suppress the narrative. Consider the movements of individuals identified as official parties. Smithsonian agents, often operating under vague research mandates, began appearing in the vicinity. They were not merely collecting samples for academic study. Eyewitness accounts, often dismissed as rural fabrication, spoke of these individuals purchasing, rather than simply documenting, any and all recovered coins. The process was discreet, almost clandestine. Farmers, eager for a few extra dollars, willingly parted with their strange finds, unaware they were participating in a quiet eradication. These transactions rarely involved official receipts or detailed ledgers. It was a cash economy, deliberately untraceable. But the suppression extended beyond the physical artifacts themselves. Local documents, particularly early newspaper issues from the 1870s and 1880s that dared to mention the unusual metallic discs or the strange agricultural phenomena, began to vanish from public libraries and county archives. One particularly curious incident involved the entire stock of a small-town printer's back issues being acquired under the guise of an historical preservation project by an organization vaguely affiliated with a state-level archaeological society. These weren't isolated incidents. A pattern began to emerge, where inconvenient truths surfaced. Documents pertaining to them slowly but surely ceased to exist in the public sphere. Furthermore, there was a systematic discouragement of further discussion or investigation. Local geologists who initially expressed an interest in the unusual soil composition or the inexplicable subsidence were suddenly reassigned to remote surveys or found their grant funding rescinded for unrelated reasons. Physicians who noted unusual physiological effects among those who spent significant time in the affected area, or among livestock grazing there, were quietly cautioned against sensationalism and advised to focus on more conventional diagnoses. Farmers who spoke too freely of their discoveries, or who continued to report strange occurrences, often found themselves facing increased scrutiny from local authorities regarding property lines or tax assessments. It was a subtle, yet undeniably effective form of coercion. This process wasn't about disproving the coin's provenance through scientific means. It was about ensuring that the uncomfortable questions they raised simply ceased to be asked. The archiving of local documents and newspaper issues wasn't for scholarly research, it was for containment. The collection of the coins wasn't for display in a museum, it was for removal from public scrutiny. This wasn't an isolated incident of a rogue scientist making a poor judgment. This was a systematic suppression, a pattern of actions by various official bodies that ensured any traces of the anomalous presence found in Illinois simply vanished from public discourse and official records. Only fragments remained in the fading memories of farmers, in whispered tales passed down generations, or tucked away in forgotten personal archives, testament to a hidden truth that powerful institutions clearly did not want spoken. The very concept of silence in the title thus takes on a chilling new dimension, not as an absence of sound, but as an enforced quiet, a deliberate muffling of inconvenient history. And so, what became of that field, the one in Illinois, where a farmer once stumbled upon a truth too inconvenient for the annals of official history? Today, it's just another stretch of productive farmland, indistinguishable from hundreds of others across the Midwest. The furrows are straight, the crops grow tall, and the tractors hum. Yet, for those few who remember, or whose families whispered the tales, that field holds a different resonance. There are no markers, no plaques, no public acknowledgement of the discovery that once sent the Smithsonian into a quiet panic. The land, having served its purpose as an unwitting witness, has simply returned to its agricultural routine, its secrets buried not just by soil, but by layers of bureaucratic indifference and carefully constructed historical amnesia. The lingering impact on the local community, however, is a subtle fracture in their understanding of history.
While official narratives paint a picture of an orderly past, where everything was neatly catalogued and understood, the old-timers remember the sudden, strange visits, the men in suits, the hushed conversations, and the abrupt disappearance of every trace of the discovery. This dissonance between lived experience and proclaimed truth fostered a quiet mistrust, a sense that not everything presented as fact by institutions could be fully relied upon. It was not a grand revolt against authority, but rather a quiet, persistent questioning, a skepticism passed down through generations whenever official pronouncements felt too neat, too convenient, too devoid of the awkward realities that sometimes present themselves. The prank explanation, so hastily deployed, left gaping holes in its narrative, holes that even decades could not fully fill.
Why such a frantic mobilization for a simple hoax? Why the pressure on property owners? Why the systematic erasure if nothing truly anomalous had been found? These questions, like unplanted seeds, lay dormant, periodically stirring beneath the surface. And what of the anomalous presence itself? Did it remain? Or was it meticulously removed, leaving no trace? Official records, predictably, are silent on the matter, a silence that speaks volumes louder than any explicit denial. The very efficiency with which the coins were gathered and the associated information suppressed suggests a thoroughness that extends beyond addressing a mere curiosity. It implies a perceived threat, a knowledge deemed too destabilizing to exist in the public sphere. We are left to surmise that whatever lay beneath that Illinois field was not just an artifact, but an inconvenient truth, one that directly challenged established timelines and accepted understandings of human presence on the North American continent. The official narrative, designed to maintain a particular historical order, simply could not accommodate such a disruption. Thus, the events of 1871 in Illinois serve as a stark illustration of how easily and effectively historical truths can be buried, not beneath physical earth, but beneath layers of official dismissal and calculated silence. The questions remain, not shouted from the rooftops, but echoing softly in the void left by censored documents and unacknowledged events. The field today reveals nothing to the casual observer, but its soil holds memories of a time when the ground yielded more than just crops. It yielded a challenge to our understanding of the world, a challenge that was swiftly and decisively silenced. And this silence is the most profound artifact of all, a testament to what institutions will do to maintain their carefully constructed versions of truth. These are the narratives we seek to uncover, the forgotten chapters waiting to be read. Subscribe and join us as we continue to unearth the parts of history that official records leave out.